Good evening, friends. Welcome to another evening with Buddhist Insights at BNN. Although we had already found a new name for it, but I can't think of it. Enlightenment Network. There was a new name that had been coined recently that I really like, but bad memory. Should have been more mindful. Anyway, welcome to Bhante Sudaso. Thank you for sharing Dhamma again. And welcome to all the invisible viewers. One has checked in. Mark, hello, welcome. And for the rest of you, don't be shy. You can say hello in the live chat. We love to see you virtually. But if not, perhaps you can take your time and we can start by chanting the Ratana Sutta. You can find the link if you want to chant with us in the live chat. Then Bhante will be leading us in meditation. And after that, he will be sharing some words of Dhamma on a very cool topic, at least for me. I'm very excited about this talk. And then after that, you're welcome to ask questions. Actually, you're welcome to ask questions at any time, but Bhante will answer them after the talk. And hello to Stacy, good to see you. Elaine, welcome. And Youssef, nice to see you as well. Wonderful. All right, so we can pass it on to Bhante Sudaso, little Bhante.
So we'll start by chanting the Ratana Sutta. And so we'll chant Namo Tassa 3 times and then go through the sutta. And after that, we'll do some meditation practice. So a quick word about this chanting. As you're doing the chanting, try to cultivate a genuine sense of reverence, affection, and gratitude for Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. That's what this chant is meant to do. It's meant to help us cultivate that wholesome attitude towards the 3 treasures. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Yani bhutani samagatani bummani vayani vantaveke. Sabeva bhuta sumana bhavantu atopi sakacha sunantu basitam. Tasmahi bhutani sameta sabe vitam karota manusiya pachaya. Devacharato jaharanti eva linkasmahi nevra katapamata. Yam kinchivitam vidavahuram vasage suvayam ratanam panitam. Nano samangati tathagatena idampi buddhe ratanam panitam. Etena sachena subhati hotu. Kayam viragam namatam panitam yada jagasakya muni samahito. Natena dhammena samati kinchi edampi dhamme ratanam panitam. Etena sachena subhati hotu. Yam buddha seto parivanayi suchim samadhimanan harikanyamahu. Samadhina tena samona vijjati dampi dhamme ratanam panitam. Etena sachena suvati hotu. Ye bhugala tasatam prasata chatari etani yugani onti. Te dakineya sugata sasavaka ete sudinnani mahapalani. Idampi sanghe ratanam panita metena sachena suvati hotu. Yesu payuta manasa dalhena kamino gotama sasanamhi. Te patipada madam vigaya latha mudhani buddhim punjamana. Idampi sanghe ratanam panita metena sachena suvati hotu. Yatinda kilo patavim sito siya chatu bhivate piya sampakampiyo. Tatupamam sappurisam vadami yo arya sachani avechapasati. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam metena sachena suvati hotu. Ye arya sachani vibhavayanti gambhira panyena sudesitani. Kinchapi te hundi pusapamata na te bhavam matamam adiyanti. Idampi sanghe ratanam panita metena sachena suvati hotu. Sahava sadasana sampadaya daya suthamma jahita bhavanti. Sakaya deti vichikrichitam cha silabatam apiyadati kinchi. Chatuha paye cha vipamuto chachabitanani abhavokatum. Idampi sanghe ratanam panita metena sachena suvati hotu. Kinchapi sokham mam karoti papakam hayena vacha udacheta sava. Avambo sota sapati chadaya avambata ditapada samuta. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu. Vanapagumbe yata pusita ge gemmanamase patamasmin gimhe. Tatupamam dhammavaram madesayi nibbanagamim paramam hitaya. Idampi buddhe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu. Varo varanyu varado varaharo anutaro dhammavaram madesayi. Idampi buddhe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu. Kinam puranam navam nati sambhavam virata cita yatike bhavasmim. Te kina bija virulli chandanim vandidhirayatayam palipo. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu. Yani bhutani samagatani bummani vayani vantaleke. Tathagatam deva manusapujitam buddham namassama suvati hotu. Yani bhutani samagatani bummani vayani vantaleke. Tathagatam deva manusapujitam dhammam namassama suvati hotu. Yani bhutani samagatani bummani vayani vantaleke. Tathagatam deva manusapujitam sangham namassama suvati hotu. Edena sacha vanjena dukkha upasamintu te. Edena sacha vanjena bhaya upasamintu te. Edena sacha vanjena roga upasamintu te. We can get into meditation posture. So taking the time to make sure your posture is very stable. Paying particular attention to how you position your feet and legs so that you're not putting pressure on anything that might make it go to sleep. Also making sure that you're sitting a little bit forward on your cushion or chair so that you're not cutting off the nerves in your upper thighs. And once you're settled into place, make a firm commitment to let the body be still, as motionless as a tree or a mountain. And just as a mountain is not disturbed by the wind, by sounds, by rainfall, in the same way, let your body and mind be undisturbed, undisturbed by sounds, sensations, thoughts. So letting sensations and thoughts just roll off the mind, just as wind and water roll off the mountain. The mountain remains unbothered, undisturbed, unshaken. Center your attention at the center of the body, like a shining light in the heart of the mountain. Letting your awareness silently, motionlessly permeate the whole body. Always keeping the mind still, steady, motionless, centered at the center of the body. Never losing track of that center point, never straying from that center point. Feeling the subtle pleasantness of a body saturated with awareness. Cultivating an appreciation for that subtle bliss of a mindfulness drenched body. Keep the mind still and sharp. Don't let it wander or go fuzzy. Keep it still and sharp, centered on the body, motionless, alert, blissful. Enjoying the body and enjoying the mind which is aware of the body. Noticing how the more still and sharp the mind is, the more enjoyable the experience of the body is. Keep nourishing and building up that feeling of pleasantness, enjoyment, and bliss. relax your posture.
Right. Thank you very much, Bante, for guiding us. And welcome to some new friends. Hello, Melinda, Al, Emily, and Pablo. Great to see you online. So at this time, we can invite Bante Sudaso to share some words of Dhamma on the 10 fetters. Thank you, Bante.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this evening, as mentioned, I'll be speaking about the 10 fetters. So in Pali, the word for fetter is samyojana. So this comes from the root verb yunjeti, which means to bind together. And it's the same root as the English word yoke, in the sense of the device that was used to tie together the necks of two cows or two horses or two donkeys so that they could pull a cart together. So the imagery the Buddha is using here is that the samyojanas are things which constrict our movement, which constrict our freedom, which keep us trapped. Although we have the illusion of moving under our own authority and power, in actuality, our ability to move is severely restricted by something that seems outside of our control. So the imagery of the samyojana, of the fetters then, the imagery is that of being trapped, being limited, being enslaved by our own defilements and delusions. So we think that we're in charge, but actually our defilements are in charge. We think that we're living our own lives, but actually our defilements are enslaving us, entrapping us. So the 10 fetters are often spoken of as being a roadmap to enlightenment. There's many suttas where the Buddha speaks about the 10 fetters, and he says that the first stage of enlightenment is attained by overcoming the first 3 fetters. The second stage of enlightenment is reached by eliminating the coarse manifestation of the 4th and 5th fetters. The third stage of enlightenment is attained by completely eliminating the 4th and 5th fetters, both coarse and subtle aspects of them. And the 4th and final stage of enlightenment is attained by eliminating the 5 remaining fetters. So then the 10 fetters are commonly divided into 2 categories called the 5 lower fetters and the 5 higher fetters, and further subdivided into the 3 initial fetters, then the 5 lower fetters, 5 higher fetters. And one of the interesting things about these 10 fetters is that although the Buddha gives them as a list of 10 in a number of places in the suttas, there's nowhere in the suttas that I'm aware of where he gives a detailed explanation of all the fetters in a single sutta. Rather, we see descriptions of individual fetters scattered throughout the suttas in different places. And the one that he gives by far the most attention to is, in fact, Sakkaya Ditthi. This is the core critical realization which is necessary in order to make any progress on the path to enlightenment. In order to reach the first stage of enlightenment, the critical piece of it is to break through Sakkaya Ditthi. So it's the one that he spends by far the most time talking about. So Sakkaya Ditthi, Sakkaya comes from two parts. So there's the prefix, which due to the ambiguities of Pali grammar, it's actually unclear which of several different prefixes it might be, as I'll explain in a moment. Put onto the word kaya. So kaya means body or group. So the prefix may be seyang, which means self. So then sakkaya means self-body or self-group. The group of things which we take to be ourselves. Or the prefix here could be sat, which means true. So true body, similar to how New Age people speak about their true self. So sakkaya then could mean your true body, your true nature. Which, of course, in the Mahayana literature, they like to say fun things like, your true nature is no nature. These very simple little statements which puncture our delusions in a single jab. And another possible prefix here would be sang, which means complete. So complete body, complete group. So indicating that we think that our body and mind is the complete description of who we are. And then ditthi means opinion or belief or viewpoint. So Sakkaya Ditthi then, in simple terms, is the belief that the components of body and mind are our true self. So the belief, this body is me, this body is mine, this body belongs to me, this body contains my soul. Or similarly thinking my feelings are me, my feelings are mine, my feelings contain my soul contains my feelings. And the same for memories, perceptions, thoughts, ideas, states of mind. So all the aspects of body and mind, which we relate to in terms of a sense of me, sense of self. So relating to body-mind as me or mine, as in me, or as our sense of self contained within them, within the components of body and mind. So this is what's meant by Sakkaya Ditthi. And so the practice of anatta sanya, which is cultivating the recognition of not self, is directly aimed at puncturing Sakkaya Ditthi. And one of the standard ways that the Buddha talks about anatta sanya is to go through every component of body and mind and to clearly see it as, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am. Netang mama, this is not mine. Neso hamasmi, I am not this. Neso me attati, this is not myself, my soul, my true nature. And the two fetters which come after this are vicikiccha, which is usually translated as doubt or skepticism. Vacillation would be perhaps a slightly more literal translation. Vicikiccha has the prefix vi, which means separate or distinct or scattered. And chikiccha is a duplication of the root, which means to think. So the root of chint, which means think. So vicikiccha then is thinking a lot in a scattered way. It's quite literally what vicikiccha means. So it's commonly translated as doubt or skepticism, which is reasonable enough, but I think it's worth pointing out that the more literal meaning of the word is vacillation. This kind of agitated thinking about, are things like this, are things like that, is it this way, is it that way, what's going on, I don't know. So that kind of scattered confusion, agitated confusion of mind. It's a bit more literally what Vicikiccha means. It's more like this scattered, agitated, dispersed vacillation of mind, which is in fact connected to doubt, which is why it's commonly translated as doubt. So when we're not sure of the way forward, we're not sure of the path to enlightenment. Maybe we're not sure enlightenment is even possible. These are elements of doubt. And the connection here with Sakaya Ditti is that until we have clearly seen that body and mind are not me, not mine, not who I am, then we'll always have a certain amount of doubt and vacillation and confusion, a certain amount of hesitancy regarding the Buddha's teachings, the Buddha's instructions. Because we're so deeply mired in relating to the world in terms of me and mine. And this is the message that we're constantly getting from every single being that we encounter. That it's quite counterintuitive to take the teachings of not self as true and accurate. So until we have some breakthrough to a direct experience of not self, until we wear away Sakaya Ditti, then there's naturally always going to be a certain amount of confused, uncertain vacillation in the mind. And the third one in Pali is Sila Bhatta Paramasa. So Sila means, can mean precept, it can mean morality, or it can mean habit. So those are its three main meanings. Vata means a religious observance or a vow or a protocol. So Sila Vata together then can mean a habitual practice, a habitual behavior that one engages in, or it can mean a set of rules that one follows. And the final word in this compound, paramasa, means a wrong grasp of something. It means to grab at something in a flawed way. So Sila Bhatta Paramasa then is a misunderstanding of religious practices, a misunderstanding of protocols. It's grabbing at practices and protocols in a foolish or deluded or confused way. By contrast, there's a handful of places in the suttas which refer to Sila Bhatta Sampanna. So somebody who has perfected Sila and Vata, someone who has a clear understanding of how to use Sila and Vata in an appropriate way, how to use precepts, moral principles, rules of conduct in an appropriate way. So Sila Bhatta Paramasa is a misunderstanding of religious protocols, a misgrasp. So clinging in an incorrect way, clinging based on misunderstanding to religious protocols. This is not saying that all religious protocols are useless. It's not saying that there's no value in precepts, that there's no value in rituals, but rather it's saying that if we don't clearly understand what those precepts and rituals are, then we're bound to hold them in an incorrect way. We're bound to misunderstand their nature. So the kind of flagship example of this is believing that a particular ritual will purify your mind and lead to enlightenment. It's kind of a classic example of this. It's a very extreme example of Sila Bhatta Paramasa. So the reason why Sila Bhatta Paramasa falls away when one has a breakthrough with cultivating not self, cultivating the recognition of not self, is because when one clearly, insightfully sees that body and mind are not self through training the mind, then one recognizes that that insight is arising through a shift in perspective, not through the performance of some particular ritual or engaging in some habitual behavior or following some particular protocol, but rather through shifting one's perspective on reality. So all three of these first three fetters are said to fall away simultaneously. And what leads the way is breaking through Sakkaya Ditthi, which is why the Buddha places so much importance on overcoming Sakkaya Ditthi, on breaking this misperception we have that body and mind are me, or mine, or who I am, or that they belong to me, or that they contain me. So breaking through this misperception of Sakkaya Ditthi. Because the moment we do that, then the next two fetters dissipate instantaneously in the same moment. So at that stage, one is a stream enterer, in the sense that one, just as a stream flows inevitably towards the ocean, and anything that's placed in the stream will therefore also flow inevitably towards the ocean. In the same way, one who has broken the three initial fetters flows inevitably towards enlightenment and will invariably reach enlightenment eventually. It might take a little while, but it's going only one direction at that point, which is towards enlightenment. So the next two fetters are kamachanda, which means interest in sensuality. So interest in sensual experiences. So as long as we're interested in sensuality, then our mind will not turn away from samsara. As long as we're interested in sensuality, then we will not be particularly interested in seeking enlightenment. We'll just be interested in seeking sensual experiences. So our enthusiasm for spiritual practice will be quite minimal. So kamachanda then is, once again, it's a fetter. It's something which restricts us, which constrains us. We think, oh, I'm just doing whatever I want to do. So much freedom. But actually, no, we're just doing whatever sensual urge appears in our mind tells us to do. That urge, eat more cookies, appears, and we're like, yes, I will express my liberty by eating cookies. But no, that's just doing what you're told to. Some tyrant tells you, eat more cookies, and you're like, I am free to eat cookies, and we go and we eat cookies. That's not freedom. That's entrapment. That's not freedom at all. Freedom is when you see that urge to eat cookies and you say, no, thank you. I'll pass. Not this time. That's freedom. Freedom is when you see the urge to text somebody and you say, no, nope, I'm not going to pick up my phone. I'll let it be. That's freedom. And closely connected to this is vyapada, which is ill will or hostility or aversion. So this aversive negative state of mind, this mind which hates things, which rejects things, which dislikes things. So then we see kamachanda and vyapada as forming a set. So kamachanda is trying to move towards something, and vyapada is trying to move away from something. So it's this constant moving towards and away, pushing and pulling at our experience. So pushing and pulling both have the characteristic of movement, of motion, of trying to change reality. So the awakened mind is that which is at peace with reality. There's no more pushing and pulling. This is why it's necessary to overcome our urges to get wrapped up in sensuality, to get wrapped up in sensual experiences. Because as long as we're pushing and pulling at reality, then it's reality that's calling the shots. As long as we're pushing and pulling at whatever illusory sensation appears before the mind, then it's the illusory sensations that are dominating our experience, that are dominating our mind, they're dominating our choices. Once again, this is not freedom, and it's definitely not wisdom. So then it's necessary to stop pushing and pulling, stop approving and rejecting, just being okay with reality as it is, not trying to get any particular experience and not trying to avoid any particular experience. So enlightenment is not an experience, it's a transcending of all experience. Enlightenment is not some particular corner of samsara. Enlightenment is that high vista from which all of samsara comes sharply into view. So the permanent destruction of coarse kamachanda, so interest in coarse sensuality and coarse aversive patterns of mind, culminates in what's called the stage of once returner. So someone who at most will be reborn as a human one more time before attaining enlightenment. So this is somebody who they still have subtle sensual desire, subtle interest in sensuality, subtle aversion, but it's not particularly strong. When interest in sensuality and aversion are completely eliminated, then that's when one is a non-returner. So one who is not subject to returning to the human world ever again. So a non-returner who dies without attaining full enlightenment is reborn in the Pure Land, which in Pali is called Suddhavasa. So Suddha means pure and Avasa means dwelling place. So Suddhavasa, the Pure Lands. And there they will inevitably attain full enlightenment, but once again, it might take a while. And the suttas do talk about 5 different categories of non-returners, but I'm not going to get into that now because 1, that takes more time than we have. And 2, it's really completely irrelevant because realistically, I'm happy with any kind of non-returner. I don't care whether it's the first or the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth kind. All of them are guaranteed to attain enlightenment as a deva eventually. So I'm quite fine with that personally. I would be very happy to be a non-returner. So that gets us through the 5 lower fetters. And these are the ones that we should really be focused on as a practitioner. We should be really focused on weakening the 5 lower fetters, cultivating their opposites. So what's the opposite of interest in sensuality? It's contentment, renunciation. What's the opposite of aversion? It's kindness and equanimity. What's the opposite of silabhata paramasa? Silabhata sampanna. It's an accurate understanding of the place and use of religious protocols, but seeing that they're not the essence of spiritual practice. They're just something which can help. It's cultivating a deep, sincere faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and confidence in our ability to attain enlightenment. And again, most importantly, it's cultivating anatta sanya, the recognition that nothing whatsoever is ourself. Nothing whatsoever is me or mine. So that's where we should be focusing our efforts. However, for the sake of completeness, I am going to talk about the 5 higher fetters. Not that it's remotely relevant to probably anybody who's watching this discourse, nor is it relevant to me, to be perfectly honest, since I'm not currently a non-returner. I hope to get there someday, but I have a ways to go. But for the sake of completeness, I'll talk about the 5 higher fetters. Advance warning, the Buddha spent way less time talking about these than he did about the first 5. So rupa raga literally means lust for form. And this is usually defined as being the same as rupa tanha, or craving for material existence, craving to have a state of existence which has physical form. So rupa raga is the passion or lust or craving to have a body, a physical body of some kind. And its counterpart, arupa raga, is the craving to have immaterial existence, the craving to have non-corporeal existence, the craving to exist in a form which is mind only, which has no physical body and is mind only. There are such states of being, but like everything else in samsara, they are temporary, unsatisfying, and do not themselves have anything whatsoever to do with wisdom. So therefore, they're not to be craved for. They're not to be lusted after. They're not of any benefit. The third of the 5 higher fetters is mana, which means conceit, arrogance, this obsession with me and mine. So this is more subtle than Sakaya Ditti. Sakaya Ditti is specific conceit. I am this body. I am these feelings. I am these thoughts. I am this awareness. So it's specific conceit. Whereas mana, as one of the 5 higher fetters, is specifically the conceit of self-existence in general. So instead of I am this body, I am this mind, mana is simply I am. And in fact, it's often defined in that way. Asmi mana, the conceit I am, the conceit of self-existence. So it's that deep, subtle belief that I exist. That's what the Buddha is talking about here. So one of the similes he uses is it's like when you have dirty laundry. And you wash the dirty laundry, that's like getting rid of Sakaya Ditti. So that stench of sweat and filth and so on is gone. But there remains a subtle aroma of the laundry soap itself. So there's still this subtle smell that's not quite right to the clothes. The really like coarse, vile stench is gone, but there's still this subtle smell of something that's not quite right. And over time, even that fades away until the clothes have no aroma at all. They're completely pure and clean. So the Buddha says that subtle, persistent aroma of laundry soap is like asmi mana. So even after we've cleansed away the belief, I am this body and mind, there still remains this subtle stench of I am, the subtle stench of the belief in self-existence. Then the fourth of the 5 higher fetters is uddhacca, which means agitation. And this is not the same agitation that we talk about when we talk about the 5 hindrances. So uddhacca, as part of the 5 hindrances, is the very coarse agitation of not being able to sit still, of thinking about a lot of random silly things. That's the coarse, ordinary form of agitation. But agitation as one of the 5 higher fetters is referring to the subtle wobbling of mind. The mind which won't quite sit completely still. The mind which is moving ever so slightly, which never quite comes to complete stillness. So it's actually a very subtle form of pushing and pulling. Very subtle form of it. And the final fetter is actually a catch-all which includes all the others, by the way, and kind of wraps up the list to make it fully complete. The final fetter is avidya, which is commonly translated as ignorance, but a more wordy translation would be a lack of true knowledge, a lack of true understanding. And avidya then is defined in a number of ways. It's defined as not understanding the Four Noble Truths. And here it means not understanding it on a deep experiential level. It's also defined as not understanding the three characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta. So not understanding that all things are impermanent, unsatisfying, and impersonal. In other words, not understanding that all things are sunyata, emptiness, empty of inherent existence. So from that core misunderstanding of reality arises all the other fetters. All of them are founded in avidya, this basic misunderstanding of the true nature of reality, this basic failure to understand that we are generating our own suffering. This failure to understand that the things we take as solid and real are insubstantial. So we're actually working on avidya from the first step of the Buddhist path, and we keep working on it all the way until the final step of the Buddhist path. So this one, it's kind of like the chorus, the refrain of Buddhism. What is avidya? And how can we diminish avidya and give rise to vidya, to true understanding, to a direct experiential knowing of reality as it is? So that's a brief overview of the 10 fetters. May we all come to break through these 10 fetters and attain complete awakening in this lifetime.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Bante, for this beautiful Dhamma talk. And friends, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the live chat. And I actually have a question, Bante, regards to Silavata Paramasa. Does the Buddha ever talk about it in terms of like actual practitioners of Buddhism? So people who are following the path, on how we're approaching the precepts as monastics, for example. So the sort of our approach towards the Vinaya, and perhaps also as lay people, like our approach towards precepts, practices in Buddhism. Does he mention it at all specifically to practitioners of the path?
I'd have to look at the suttas and see the context that he uses it in. I can't think off the top of my head if he specifically applies it to the Buddhist precepts, because the Buddha is pretty clear that following the Buddhist precepts is something which lays the foundation for the higher training of the mind. But he's also clear that it is the higher training of the mind that leads to awakening. So just following the 5 precepts is not going to bring about enlightenment. Even getting higher ordination and following the precepts of a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni is not going to lead to enlightenment. But it can be a supporting condition.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it most certainly is a supporting condition to follow the 5 precepts or the 8 precepts or the 10 precepts. And the Patimokkha rules, if held and applied in line with Dhamma, can also be supporting conditions for attaining awakening. But in and of themselves, they do not. You can follow the Patimokkha perfectly, but not be one step closer to enlightenment, because it is the training of the mind which matters.
Thank you. Right. So I was thinking, actually, when when you said like using the precepts in an appropriate way is Silavata Sampanya. So it's perfected. So it was just what was coming up in my mind was that sometimes, for example, even amongst monastics, we can get so obsessed with following the precepts, which comes from a wholesome mind state, but then we stop. We can fail to kind of understand the purpose of the precept to begin with, and it becomes just a ritual. If you see what I mean, like for example, there are different ways also, say to use the allowables, for example, and different. We were talking about it the other day, how there are certain traditions where they strain 3 times the juice, for example, to make sure that there is like not even 1 millimeter of pulp or whatever, and then it becomes kind of a sort of. I'm not saying that that shouldn't be done, but it's the only kind of example of that right now seems kind of safe to bring up in a way. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, so I think that's also missing why it is that only certain things are allowed in the evening. The reason for that is to train us to recognize our desire and attachment and to work on letting go of them. So just in that example, actually, I don't really see as it makes any difference whether fruit juice is strained 1 time or 3 times or 0 times. If your mind is filled with craving and desire and you go to chug some triple strained fruit juice, then you're building up your defilements. Whereas if your mind is free of desire and attachment, but you recognize that your body is thirsty and deprived of vitamins and minerals, and a glass of fruit juice would help your body get by, then drinking some single strained or 0 strained fruit juice is not going to be an obstacle for you. So actually, I think that's a quite relevant example. Again, the purpose of precept practice is to help us identify and eliminate our defilements. The precepts themselves may or may not have any particular significance, especially when we get into the Patimokkha rules. But rather, they're meant to be ways that we help to train the mind.
Okay, thank you.
So another example of that is the precept of not eating after noon, of only eating between dawn and midday. Well, the Buddha could just as easily have said, only eat between midday and dusk, and the precept would have had exactly the same effect. Or said, only eat between dusk and midnight, exactly the same effect. Well, that would have been a little weird, admittedly. But the point is that it's creating a restriction around eating so that we can start to see our defilements around eating. But there's nothing inherently magical about eating in the morning, at least not that I'm aware of. Okay.
Great, thank you. And we have actually quite a few questions now that have appeared. So let me see. Elaine says, just realized that I have believed that my thoughts, mind, and emotions are me. Welcome to the club, Elaine. Is it better to think of them as cultivated habits that arise because the track they hold in the mind are deep, and that the mind is a compilation of the remains from past lives?
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to look at it. Really helps to depersonalize this mess. You can see it that way. It's like a bunch of programs that somebody else wrote. Or it's kind of like when you go to look at the hard drive on your computer and you're like, oh, what is all this mess? What's all these random files? And you realize, oh, I put all those random files there 5 years ago. But there's also the realization that it's just a bunch of mess which you don't have any use for anymore, but which is still being carried forward. I'm not talking about me, by the way. I actually wipe my hard drive a couple times a year. But I know a lot of people who their hard drive is this crazy, chaotic mess of junk from years and years and years ago that they don't have any use for. So that's what our mind is like. Our mind is this chaotic compilation of junk and useless programs and old files which aren't relevant anymore, and the operating system is kind of buggy, so it keeps like opening the wrong programs or like playing this old song and like opening files which are out of date, and so this is what it's like. We don't really have that much control over it, and most of what's in there is just useless junk which isn't relevant to us anyway. So that also helps you get a little bit of peacefulness around it. Is you're just like, oh, that deranged piece of hardware has gone haywire again, because that's what it's prone to doing. So you just watch with a sort of detached amusement as the hardware goes haywire, and you're like, no big deal. Not me, not mine. So you train yourself to just let thoughts bounce off you without affecting you, just as we train ourselves to let physical sensations bounce off us without affecting us. Okay?
Great, thank you, Bante. And John says, what is the proper role of rituals in the practice?
So they can be, rituals can be very effective ways of helping us develop particular mind states. So for example, at the start of the chanting, I gave the encouragement to use the chanting as a container for cultivating a genuine sense of reverence, affection, and gratitude for Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. That makes it a useful ritual. On the other hand, if you're just like, okay, here's the part of the live stream where we chant a string of meaningless syllables, and then you chant a string of meaningless syllables, then that's all it was. It was just chanting a string of meaningless syllables because that funny bald guy told you to. That's an example of an empty ritual. From the outside, it looks exactly the same. But from the inside, it's completely different. Because the first person comes through it with a wholesome mind, and a mind which is even more inclined towards the wholesome. Whereas the second person comes through it with an unwholesome mind, and a mind that's even more inclined towards the unwholesome. But from the outside, it looks exactly the same. Only the inside is different. Okay?
Okay, thank you. And John also asks, how can we be certain about the Buddha's supramundane consciousness as part of eliminating doubt?
So faith in Buddhism is based upon two things: direct experience and logical inference. So as your practice develops and grows, as your understanding of the Dhamma develops and grows, then your faith in the Buddha develops and grows. And eventually you will realize that the mind of the Buddha is vast and inconceivable, and all things are contained within it, including you right now in this moment, are contained within the mind of Buddha, not separate from the mind of Buddha. Right now, right here. This moment is itself the inconceivable body and mind of the Buddha. But don't take my word for it. Follow the practices he teaches, study the Dhamma, reflect deeply on it, see it in your own life, and ask yourself, what are the implications of this? What are the implications of these practices and teachings? And slowly it will start to dawn on you that the Buddha was not an ordinary human being. He was not an ordinary being at all. Well, he started off that way, but he did not end up that way. Okay?
And there's quite a few questions, maybe Zen answers.
Oh, okay, Zen answers.
And actually, John has some other questions, but I'll get back to them later so everybody has an opportunity to ask questions. So Yusef is asking, why do we believe we have a self?
Delusion. Next.
Maybe for Yusuf.
Habit since beginningless time. Next. Okay, because it's possible. Next. You said Zen answers. Hey, 8:51. We're running out of time.
Okay. Bhavani says, Namaste. If I see a bowl, I see emptiness, nothingness, space, light on the rim of the bowl, etc. Is that mindfulness? What is meant by seeing the things as they are?
The fact that you think there's a bowl there already means you're not seeing things as they are. Next.
Let's see. Gita is asking, does sankhara constitute tendencies and traits leading to current actions?
That's included within sankhara, yes. Tendencies and habits and patterns are included within sankhara khanda.
Very good question, Gita.
Next.
And Gita Jnana says, love your Zen answers, Bhante. Awesome. Okay, we can get back to John's question since you're very Zen. How can we tell that the first 3 fetters have been eliminated for certain?
You will know beyond a shadow of a doubt with absolute, unshakable certainty, and there will be no need whatsoever for you to ask anybody else to confirm it for you. The Buddha is very clear on this. So in some traditions, they have people who will come and tell you that you're a stream enterer. That's a clear sign that there are no stream enterers in those traditions. Because if you think you need somebody to tell you whether or not you're a stream enterer, then you aren't one. A stream enterer has absolute, unshakable faith that they are a stream enterer because they have clearly seen for themselves that this body and mind are not who they are. And there is no shred of self-perception in relation to anything in body and mind. So they see their body and mind the same way you see somebody else's body and mind. So when I look at ayasoma, I very clearly know that is not me, that is not mine. When you see your own body in the same way, when you see your own mind in the same way, then you're a stream enterer. Okay.
And he also asks, what would be an example of an improper use of precepts for a lay person today?
Well, the 5 precepts are pretty harmless. It's pretty hard to misuse the 5 precepts. They're quite innocuous. It's usually when we get into misinterpretations of them that we run into problems. Or when we try to apply them without a broader understanding of Dhamma. So for example, the 4th precept of not lying, some people then think that means that they just need to blurt out whatever's on their mind, even if it's harmful. But the Buddha is quite clear that if something is harmful, then even if it's true, we should not say it. Or if it's not the right time, then even if it's true, we should not say it. So vowing to refrain from lying doesn't mean that we always tell the complete truth, whether it's hurtful or proper or not. We still have to make that extra consideration of, is this beneficial? Is it the right time? Rather than just, is it true? So that would be one example. And I've met people like this. I've met people who, they take the 5 precepts and then they start telling the truth, but in ways that are extremely harmful. An example of this is you see someone and you tell them, hello, I think you are very ugly. That may be a true statement. Probably not a good thing to say, though. Okay?
Great, thank you. Natalie says, as a lay person, there seems to be an inevitability of sensuality. Advertising, music, Tinder, etc.
Delete Tinder.
Wow, that was even more sad than I didn't even finish the question. How can a layperson detach from sensuality while still living in a society that prioritizes it?
By taking the 8 precepts.
Hmm. Which
Next
includes
question.
deleting Tinder.
Which includes deleting Tinder.
And Mumble Rocks, I don't remember the real name.
Mumble Rocks?
Yeah.
That's a good name.
It is a good name, so we'll keep Mumble Rocks. What is the difference between Bhavatanha and Kamatanha? Don't we want things to be a certain way because they produce worldly pleasant feelings?
No, these are two distinctly different things. Kama tanha is wanting a sensual experience, whereas bhava tanha is wanting a state of existence. So those are quite different things. But naturally, you need to have a state of existence in order to have sensual experiences, which is why kama tanha is the more coarse form of craving and the one that goes away first. Okay?
All right, thank you, Bante. And my last question for the evening is, can you speak briefly or not briefly about Udacha in the context of the jhanas?
Yeah, briefly speaking, as long as your mind is wobbling, you will not enter jhana.
But since it's one of the higher fetters,
that's an interesting question. So the implication would be that even in jhana, there's a very slight wobbling of the mind. Yeah. But that the coarse wobbling has to stop in order for one to enter jhana. The mind has to be relatively still and collected in order to enter jhana. But apparently there's still a subtle wavering.
But does the Buddha actually use the word udacha, like the Pali word udacha, at all in the context of the jhanas, or does he use another word in terms of education?
As one of the 5 hindrances, yeah, udacha kukacha, translated as restlessness and agitation, restlessness and anxiety. Another explanation that I've heard is that in jhana, the mind is still, but there remains the tendency towards movement, the tendency towards agitated movement of mind. So there can be a temporary experience of stillness, but inevitably that tendency towards agitation will cause the mind to fall out of jhana, will cause the mind to start wobbling again.
All right, great, thank you. Oh, so then you would say that then it's only eliminated in this context.
Yeah.
Oh, Elaine says, "Hey, Soma, I had asked a couple questions. Please, if you have time, it is about how to think of the mind, thoughts, and emotions. Maybe I skipped one. Sorry."
Well,
let me see.
This is going to be a super zen answer since we're out of time.
Well, we answered that one, and then the only thing I see is, I smile at all the science that now talks about the health benefits of time-restricted eating and only eating one meal. I suspect the Buddha knew how it could improve our health and longevity. No, I think we answered your question. Yeah, I think the only question was actually the thoughts, minds, emotions are me. Do they arise because they track the hold in the mind are deep? And that the mind is a compilation of the remains from past lives? You answered that already.
Regarding the food thing, I recall when scientists were saying that we should eat a lot of very small meals all day long. And then at some point they switched to saying that we should do intermittent fasting, which is basically the Buddhist monk diet, which is to eat a lot only during one part of the day and not at all the rest of the time. So scientists like to change their minds about things, but the Buddha doesn't. The Buddha's teachings remain the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Yes, Elaine, that was the first question we asked to Bante. So if you rewind the recording, you'll find the answer. All right, so I think that's all for this evening. So we'll see you again tomorrow morning for Sutta study with me. And the subject will be the Soma Sutta. Very interesting. Soma speaks about Soma. And then in the evening, Bhakti Sudazo will be sharing another talk. And then about one subject that you'll see on YouTube. And then Friday morning, Venerable Pavuto will also be sharing some other words of Dhamma on the suttas that you'll also see on YouTube, the topic. And then on Saturday evening, our one of our favorite monks. Now we can't say our favorite monk because we have many monks.
We don't say favorites here.
Yes. One of our favorite monks, Venerable Sumano, will be sharing Dhamma live. So you have to come here to the lawn at Empty Cloud Monastery to hear Venerable Sumano's first live talk. So wherever you are, come here. Cam says, yes, self-talk. Yes, I know, right? Isn't it? It's not funny. All right, so we can end the evening with 3 sadhus with lots of gratitude for Bhante Sudazo for sharing nonstop the Dhamma with us. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And as we like to say, have a great